The number of fines for local corporations and the size of the fines went up after the newspaper went out of business.
Right.
The dangers vulture hedge funds pose to newspapers. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by Rachel Treisman over at NPR about one of the biggest threats that local news outlets are facing. The article, "When This Hedge Fund Buys Local Newspapers, Democracy Suffers," discusses an article from The Atlantic detailing a strategy being implemented by Alden Global Capital that is impacting newspapers across the country. A spokesperson from the firm took issue with the reporter and his sources but failed to address the actual claims made in the piece. "There isn't really anything that can fill the hole these newspapers will leave if they're shut down," said The Atlantic's McKay Coppins. Here are a few of our big takeaways. Research has found that without robust local journalism holding people in power accountable, corruption and city budgets tend to increase while civil engagement and voter turnout falls. The strategy implemented by Alden Global Capital, which Coppins calls a vulture hedge fund, involves absorbing faltering publications and maximizing profits to appease shareholders as quickly as possible without the goal of running a sustainable business. This profit-driven strategy involves drastically reducing newsrooms' resources like office space and cutting staff using buyouts, leaving the remaining reporters with an unsustainable workload. While it's true that many smaller papers are struggling to find a foothold in an increasingly digital news environment, these problems aren't being helped by eliminating what little chance they did have at finding a sustainable model. Because of this, Our Hometown provides a wide range of full-service digital publishing resources so that papers of any size or technical ability can easily deliver news to their community.
You read the full article. Share with us anything you have to add.
This is a pretty good summary of it. I didn't actually read this whole article as kind of a condensed version of a much larger story in the Atlantic.
Yes, I just feel like this first takeaway is something that we covered in a recent story.
Yes.
That a constant trend. So people in power, they're talking about in the government and in big business on the local level. Alden Capital, they're in the news a lot. Some of the things I've heard that they do is they will kind of regionalize the local newspaper. So they actually don't often even have an office there anymore, so that's the third point, but they kind of hollow things out and make it more regional. So they'll take news from the closest daily in the closest metro area and put it in the local newspaper, just to keep the page count up. We don't see this though at our publishers. That's the thing, that we can't really relate to this because, these huge chains that have been bought out by venture capital, they're not like really the independent mom and pops that we work with. That's been great to work with them because we haven't really seen this effect. They haven't been pushed into this, but yeah, it's just kind of hollowing out the product. They're trying to keep the ads in there. They're trying to keep the page count up, but it's not really covering the local stories in as much depth as they once did when they actually had people in the community. So they're cutting staff, using buyouts. They're just running it like a business. And I guess, they come into it, they're buying it, and they don't see a future in these companies. So they're kind of just pulling out all the profit that they can.
The way the article described it, it's almost like they're just buying these things to create perceived value so that they can say that these are our holdings, and they don't really care about what the holdings are doing
or what the long-term future is. But today, they own these media properties, but they've all been regionalized. They're not really supporting local advertising anymore anyway. It's probably getting more regional as well, and even more national. So that's just kind of an industry trend to keep an eye out for. These venture funds, there was a ton of venture funding around. When I started at the company 12 years ago in tech, there was also a lot of newspapers being bought by these companies. And now we're kind of seeing the downstream effects of that. So
we've also seen Gannett, I believe, sold a few papers back.
Yeah, they're not exactly venture capital, but they were kind of
swallowing up papers for a while. And it was under the guise of and maybe guise is a bad word. They were supporting local newspapers. So they were kind of holding them over for a time. And that was helpful. But still, one of the first things that was done was downsizing staff, office space, and content. I think this article kind of preaches to the choir. I think most publishers are really aware of the threat.
Sure.
Doing everything they can to hang on.
What can you really say more than that? Everyone does know this is happening. This has kind of happened in a lot of different industries.
It's good for our publishers to know, though, that we support them. I don't think it's always worth repeating that we support our publishers. That's our main focus, is to keep them publishing.
What you pointed out about Gannett selling back the papers, they're kind of like the venture capital funds in the sense that they're so large, but they are a media organization. So they're probably not as extreme in the vulture side.
Right. You don't have a sportswear company buying newspapers. Yeah.
When it gets to the corporate level, you don't have that local connection. So I think they share that in common, but the fact that they are being sold back to local owners is definitely a good sign for the industry. And, one of our customers are buying up papers like crazy. So it does seem to be swinging in the other direction. When I came in 12 years ago, you heard a lot about venture capital buying groups. It was much more news about that than about the other directions. Thanks for watching Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.